Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. I'll tell you something about prison that sounds simple, but the truth behind it is razor thin. A man can be 2 steps from freedom and still feel chained to the same ghost that dragged him in. I learned that watching my cellie, a quiet dude named Alan Mercer, wrestle with news from the outside that hit harder than any shank ever could. Alan was one of those men who floated through the unit like fog, never loud, never reckless, kept his bed tight, his shoes clean, and his mouth shut. He was the kind of inmate who made officers forget he existed, which is a kind of superpower in a place where being noticed usually means somebody's about to bleed or somebody's about to snitch. He had 1 year left, 12 months, 52 weeks, a calendar you could fold in your back pocket. And every night, he would sit on the edge of his bunk with this little plastic mirror in his hand, practicing the face he wanted to carry home. Calm, grateful, ready. I used to joke that he looked like he was trying to learn how to smile again, one muscle at a time. He'd just shake his head. What kept him steady was Carla, his wife. She wasn't a fairy tale woman or some long-suffering saint. She was loud, bossy, beautiful in a real-life way, and she sent pictures of herself with messy hair and chipped nail polish, and he loved her for that. Said it made him feel like the world wasn't waiting for him to be someone he couldn't be anymore. Every Sunday she'd call, he'd pace the cell like he was tracing the outline of a dream, head down, hand on his forehead, smiling like hope wasn't dangerous. And even though I wasn't trying to pry, you can't help but hear every word when your cell is the size of someone's walk-in closet. She'd tell him how the kids were doing, what bills she paid, what bills she hadn't, how she wished time would hurry up and spit him back out. Then one night, the night this whole story shifted, he didn't pace. He sat on his bunk like a man waiting for a doctor to walk in with results nobody wants to hear. The phone rang. He answered, and the tone in his voice went from warm to cold in a single breath. "Carla, what?" He wasn't loud, but something in him cracked. I saw it in the way his shoulders curled forward like he was trying to fold himself into a smaller target. He didn't say much, just these short, choked off phrases like he was being punched through the receiver. When he hung up, he didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at that dead phone like it had betrayed him personally. After a minute, he said, "Joe." She stepped out on me. His voice was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. The kind where you know a storm was doing push-ups behind his ribs. I didn't say anything yet. I've learned that when a man starts confessing pain, your first job is to shut your mouth and make space for the truth to crawl out. Then he added the part that dug under his skin like glass. She said the guy gave her something. I felt the air change. Not dramatically, not loud, just tighter, like the room inhaled and forgot to let go. He rubbed his forehead and kept talking, voice cracking like old paint. She said she got tested, came back with an infection, an STD. She says it's gone now. Medicine fixed it, but he swallowed. She wants another chance. He laughed a little then. Not a real laugh, but that hollow kind men make when they're trying to keep from breaking something expensive inside themselves. She said she was lonely, said she missed a man in the house, said she thought I'd understand. Understand. Now, I've been in prison long enough to know that word is a trap door men fall through every day. He kept talking, voice drifting. I was here counting days. She was out there counting excuses. He wasn't asking for advice yet. He was bleeding out the truth. I just let him. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat upright, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it was telling him a secret he didn't want to hear. Around 3 a.m., he whispered, I don't know if I can forgive her. I didn't answer. Forgiveness is personal, like tattoos or funerals. You got to pick the one you can live with. The next morning, he moved slow. His routine was usually sharp: bunk, shower, coffee, yard. But now everything had this dragged down heaviness, like his muscles were carrying old furniture. On the walk to chow, he said, "What would you do?" I shook my head. "Brother, you don't want my advice on relationships. I burned every bridge I ever built and called the ashes experience." He cracked half a smile, but it died quick. We sat in chow with the same tray of gray eggs we get every Tuesday. But he wasn't eating. He was turning that plastic fork in his hand like he was deciding whether to bend it, break it, or stab himself with it. Then he said something that showed me just how deep the wound went. "I thought she was the one thing the streets couldn't poison." That line hit me because every man in prison has that one thing they think is safe: a woman, a kid, a memory, a family member who writes letters with hearts on the envelope. But nothing is safe from time, especially not love. Over the next few days, Alan walked around like a ghost trying to haunt his own life. He folded his clothes twice, cleaned the sink 5 times, reread letters like he was hunting for proof that he'd imagined everything Carla kept calling. One night he answered, I didn't listen in, not out of respect, but because the pain in his voice made me feel like I was eavesdropping on a man's heart surgery. He whispered things like, yeah, I know it, and I hear you, and I don't know if I can. Then silence long enough to feel heavy. When the call ended, he looked up at me with eyes that didn't look like his anymore. Joe, she said she ended it with him. She said she's ashamed. She said she wants to rebuild. I nodded slowly. And what did you tell her? He shrugged it. I said I'd think about it. And then he said the line that told me exactly how lost he really was. She's still my home. I didn't judge him. Men in prison don't crave sex the way outsiders think we do. Not really. What we crave is someone to come back to, someone to say our name like it still belongs to a person and not a number. But wanting a home doesn't mean the door is safe. The unit felt colder that week. Maybe it was just him. A man's heartbreak can change the temperature of a room. Every time he checked the mail call board, his hands trembled. Every time the officers walked through doing count, he stiffened like he expected bad news to be wearing a badge. He started skipping yard, started eating less, started staring at his wedding band, which he wore on a thread around his neck, like it was a bomb that might go off if he breathed wrong. One night, he finally broke open. It wasn't dramatic, no yelling, no punching the walls, just him sitting on the floor with his head in his hands whispering, I don't know if I'm a fool or a husband. I sat beside him and not close, just enough so he knew he wasn't alone. He said, Nick, she wants to work it out. She says it was a mistake, but a mistake with consequence. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is cheaper than lies. He went on. I've been faithful in the one place where temptation should be easy. And she... He didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't ask him to. The next morning, Alan didn't get out of bed right away. Normally he'd be up before count, already brushing his teeth, already folding his bed like he was trying to earn a medal in neatness. But that morning, the man lay there staring at the ceiling like he was waiting for it to tell him what kind of life he'd step into when he finally swung his legs over the edge of the bunk. Around breakfast time, he finally sat up, slow and stiff, like sadness had weight to it. And honestly, sometimes it does. You don't realize how heavy a single truth can be until you're carrying it in a room too small to pace. He rubbed his face, looked over at me and said, Joe, I still love her. Not dramatic, not ashamed, just honest, like someone reading their sentence out loud for the first time. I nodded, because that's the only thing you can do when a man admits something he's terrified to believe. He pulled out a stack of letters, rubber banded soft at the edges, creased in the middle, from how often he'd unfolded and refolded them. Letters from Carla. Letters filled with nicknames, plans, the kind of promises couples make when they think time is loyal. He thumbed through them like he was looking for a version of her he could still trust. Or maybe a version of himself he didn't want to lose. Then he said something that hit me sideways. She told me he wasn't even worth it. Said it was stress. Said it was loneliness. Said it was a moment she regrets. I leaned against the wall, crossed my arms, and let the words sit between us of loneliness. That right there is a currency people outside the fence don't understand. Prison loneliness is different, and it's loud. It echoes when nothing else does. And the people waiting on the outside, they feel their own kind of loneliness too. Doesn't excuse betrayal, but it explains how temptation finds cracks. Alan asked for my opinion, and I hesitated. Because this wasn't advice about smuggling phones or managing debts. This was a man's whole life in a single fragile decision. Still, he pushed. Joe, be straight with me. Do you think a woman can make a mistake and still love you? I didn't answer at first, not because I didn't know what I thought, but because my thoughts were nothing he needed to build his future on. I've seen love rot. I've watched it collapse like a roof with termites. I felt it turn into something sharp enough to cut open whatever hope a man keeps hidden. But Alan wasn't me. He still believed love could be repaired if you caught the leak before the whole floor warped. I finally said, I think forgiveness is real, but it never comes free. He stared at the wall like the words were written there. Later that day, he told me he was going to call her again. He walked out of the cell with this slow, tired determination, the kind that reminded me of old boxers walking into the ring one last time. When he came back, his eyes were red, but not from crying and from thinking too hard. From trying to bend the world into a shape he could live with. Carla had begged him to not give up on her, begged him to remember they had history, begged him to believe the man she'd been with meant nothing. She wants counseling when I get out. He said, she wants us to start fresh. He said it like he wanted to believe it, but didn't trust his own voice yet. We walked laps in the yard after dinner, and he told me everything, every detail of the affair, every word she'd said, every promise she'd made to fix it. The guy didn't even care about her, Alan said. He just wanted something easy, something available, something I couldn't stop. That sentence stuck with me, because that's how prison breaks you. Not with violence, but with helplessness. You're stuck in here while life keeps happening out there. You can't protect your woman. You can't guard your home. You can't stand between her and the wolves. You're just watching from behind glass like your own life is a museum exhibit. As we circled the yard, Alan muttered, I thought loyalty was the one thing she'd never drop. I told him the truth, the quiet, ugly truth most men don't like to admit. People don't stay loyal because of love. They stay loyal because of discipline. He stopped walking, looked at me. Are you saying she wasn't disciplined? I shook my head. I'm saying she was human, and humans fold when life presses the right bruise. He didn't respond, just kept walking. For the next week, he was unpredictable. Some mornings he'd be hopeful, talking about rebuilding, therapy, moving to a new city after release. Other mornings he'd be dark, quiet, shaking his foot, biting the inside of his lip like he was holding back anger big enough to crack bone. One night after lights out, he whispered, "Joe, you ever love someone so much it scares you?" I told him the truth. Yeah, and it never ended well. He sighed and said, "I don't want to throw away 20 years of marriage because of one night." Then something broke loose inside him and he added, "But she broke something too. Something I didn't know could be broken." That's when I realized Alan wasn't just struggling with forgiveness. He was struggling with identity, who he was as a husband and who he was as a man, who he would be when he got out. Because betrayal doesn't just change how you see the other person. It changes how you see yourself. He started writing long letters he never mailed, pages full of contradictions, promises, threats, apologies, accusations, dreams, nightmares. I caught him ripping one up and throwing the pieces under the bunk. He said, "I don't even know what I want anymore." And that right there, that confusion is the most dangerous emotional neighborhood a man can wander into, because confusion leads to desperation. Desperation leads to bad decisions. Bad decisions lead to consequences you can't bargain your way out of. I kept an eye on him, watched him doing showers, watched him doing yard, watched him while he slept, because heartbreak has a way of sharpening things, razors, pencils, thoughts. Then one afternoon, we were standing in line for commissary when one of the younger dudes, a loudmouth named Jalen, made a joke about wives not being loyal. It said something like, "Man, if she cheated once, she been cheating. Y'all just late to the news." Before the sentence even finished, Alan turned and punched him. Not a wild punch and not a sloppy punch, a punch that came from the spine, a clean and direct, personal. Jalen hit the ground, holding his jaw. COS rushed in, everybody backed up. But I grabbed Alan's shoulder before they grabbed him and whispered, "Don't go to the hole behind somebody else's mouth." He froze, hands shaking and breathing heavy, eyes glassy. They cuffed him, but didn't slam him, didn't drag him, just marched him to the lieutenant's office. He came back a few hours later with nothing but a verbal warning and a lecture about self-control. But the real punishment was the look on his face, the realization that the anger he thought he had tucked away was now leaking through the seams. That night, he finally asked me the question he'd been circling around. "Joe, am I stupid for even thinking about taking her back?" I took a breath, let it sit, looked him in the eyes and said, "Wanting to save something doesn't make you stupid, but saving something that can't hold water will drown you." He looked down at his hands, hands that used to build things, hands that now trembled when he held the phone. He whispered, "I don't want to go home angry. I don't want to go home alone. I don't want to go home to nothing." And that was the true under every true. Alan wasn't deciding about Carla. He was deciding about himself. Because sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the version of you that let someone hurt you. That night he finally slept. Not well and not peacefully, but he slept. The next morning he woke up looking different. Not healed and not broken, just settled. Like a decision had been forming in the dark and finally shaped itself. He didn't say what he decided, didn't tell me whether he'd take her back or walk away, didn't ask for validation. He just said, "I think I know what I need to do." And the way he said it told me the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, no matter which direction he walked, because some decisions don't fix your life. They just change the kind of pain you'll have to live with. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.